All right. I just turned my phone off. When's the last time you actually turned your phone off completely? Just left it off. Some people do that every night. Anyway, welcome to the Podcast Engineering Show. My name is Chris Curran. Today we're going to go over 9 teaching points that will expand your audio production knowledge. I am a podcast producer, and I also run Podcast Engineering School, where I teach people how to produce podcasts professionally and make a great living working from home, working for themselves, with a small roster of clients and earning very good money. Anyway, on this show, I deliver podcast production techniques on a silver platter. Now, okay, I already hear some of you, but Chris, you haven't put out an episode in like 3 months. I know I'm sort of in the middle of pod fading, but I'm not really pod fading. I'm just publishing less often, and I'm keeping the show afloat. I'm still posting on social media, and I'm still posting on YouTube, actually. Check out the YouTube channel for Podcast Engineering School. So we're going to go over these 9 teaching points. But first, FYI, the next semester of Podcast Engineering School starts on January 9th, 2024. Yeah, January 9th, 2024. And the 9 teaching points I'm going to go over, I'm going to link to the Daily Goody posts in the show notes. So check the show notes. You can, anything I talk about, you can click the link and go to that post. And by the way, I just got back from Podcast Movement. Well, it's been like a week and a half, or almost 2 weeks, but Podcast Movement was in Denver. It was awesome. I got to drive there because I live within driving distance. It was great. Yeah, if you can attend some of these bigger conferences or even just one, it's really worth it. You know, I know it's a lot of money. Not only for the ticket, but for the hotel and the airfare. It's a lot of money. But I'm telling you, it will energize you like nothing else. And also, the last announcement before we get going, I started a new podcasting community on the DynaCaster protocol. So I'll have the link in the show notes for that. It's a brand new podcasting community. And so if you click the link, you'll have to create a DynaCaster account. There are a bunch of different apps you can use. Anyway, it'll explain everything when you get there. So let's go. Let's cover these Daily Goody posts, which I also haven't been publishing many Daily Goody posts either. So I don't know. I've posted like 800 Daily Goodies or something over the last like 4 or 5 years. And honestly, I don't know what to write about anymore. I guess I could rehash some old posts and everything. And you know what I mean? I don't know. I'm not a marketer, I want to work with audio. All right, first one we're going to cover today. Are you ready? Microphone polar patterns. Yeah, so each microphone has its own pickup pattern or polar pattern, and I came across this post on a website. It's called The Complete Guide to Microphone Polar Patterns. So I linked to that in this Daily Goody post. And the popular polar patterns are cardioid, omnidirectional, and maybe supercardioid. But there's also hypercardioid. There's also lobar pattern, which is for shotgun microphones. And there's also bidirectional, which is the figure 8 pattern. So it's good to know, first of all, it's good to understand each of these 6 polar patterns, just to understand them, right? And secondly, it's imperative that whatever microphone you're using or whatever microphone your clients are using, you need to know what mic it is and also what polar pattern it is so that you can instruct them to place the microphone properly and pointing in the correct direction. The classic is the Blue Yeti, which people point in the wrong direction. So you don't want to do anything like that, and you don't want your clients to do anything like that. So just understand, and this is a good example of knowledge that once you have it and you understand it, then you don't ever have to go study it again. It's there in your brain because it's pretty simple. So yeah, polar patterns, make sure you know what polar patterns are, and more importantly, whatever microphone you're using or your clients are using, make sure you know what polar pattern it is so that everyone can use the microphone properly. All right, next post. 3 plugins I purchased but rarely use. And that's unfortunate. So, okay. So for all of you, longtime listeners who know that I have a serious plugin addiction, you'll be happy to know that I haven't really bought any new plugins in a long time, like at least a year, maybe more than a year. And it's good because I really have I have enough plugins at this point, right? I really do. But anyway, these are 3. Well, this post is from about a year and a half ago. And so these 3 plugins I rarely use, and I haven't even used them since then. But all right, the first plugin is called Level Magic. Level Magic, and it's made by Flux, Jünger Audio. And this is like an auto leveler. But, normally we talk about like the Vocal Rider is a leveler, and, there are other leveler plugins out there. But Level Magic is on a whole nother level. This is really, this is what some radio stations use to level their audio right before it goes out on the air. It has way, way more features and use cases than Vocal Rider. It has way more settings. It's really awesome. I think it costs like $300 or $400. It's really awesome though. But I bought it, but I don't know. I never really used it too much. I used it a few times, and sometimes you'll be producing, or sometimes I'd be producing a certain piece of audio and I'd be like, you know what, let me break out the Level Magic. And so I've used it a couple times and I really like it, but it's just, it's not necessary a lot of the times, so I don't use it. All right, the second one that I purchased but rarely use is Split EQ by Eventide. Split EQ. This is an amazing EQ because normally on an EQ, you adjust the parameters and you boost or cut at various frequencies, and it's great. But the Split EQ, you can actually manipulate the audio 2 different ways. That's why it's called Split EQ. You can adjust the transient information separately from the tonal information. So it's almost like 2 EQs in one, but you can boost at a certain, let's say you're boosting at a certain frequency. You can either boost the transient information at that frequency, or you can boost the tonal information at that frequency, or both, right? And the transients are, vocal sibilants, the attack of sound, also noises and pops and stuff like that. Also plosives, right? So you can use the Split EQ as a deplosive probably. I've never tried that, but you probably could. And then there's the tonal information, which is the sustained notes, the harmonics, the tone. So the transients and the tone you can adjust separately. Really cool. Now here's the thing, for podcast production and the human voice in general, this is not really necessary. It's a little overkill, right? The Split EQ is really made for music production. But anyway, very cool plugin that I don't use hardly ever, but it is really cool. All right, and the third plugin that I bought but don't use very much is called Dear VR Pro. That's from Plugin Alliance. It's an amazing 3D audio plugin. And so you can use it as like a reverb or an ambience creation tool. But you can also use it with Dolby Atmos, which is a newer format of, surround sound or 3D audio. So Dear VR Pro is pretty cool. I've used it a few times in episodes. In fact, I produced a little skit on this show years ago. It was like an alien ship pulling up into my yard, and then and then me walking onto the ship and then the ship leaving. But when I did that, I used the Deer VR Pro for some of the effects. So anyway, and obviously you can understand why that plugin I've rarely used in podcast production, because it's not necessary. So, all right, well, let's move on to the next Daily Goody post, which I think I mentioned. You can sign up to receive the Daily Goodies in your email. You can sign up on the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. But like I mentioned, I haven't been putting out many of them either, but whatever. Okay, next post. DynaCaster microphone from SE Electronics. Yeah, this was a new mic about 1.5 years ago, the DynaCaster microphone, and I actually used it on a episode of my show back about 1.5 years ago. It's a pretty cool mic. It sounded pretty good. It has a cardioid pickup pattern, and it had some cool features, including onboard gain boosting. That's pretty cool. And several EQ switches and more. And it was my episode 232 that I used the DynaCaster microphone on. So if you want to hear what I sound with the DynaCaster, of course, I'm pretty sure I did post-production with it. So, it's not the raw sound of the DynaCaster mic that you'll hear on episode 232. I don't think, but still, you get to hear the general tone of it, right? Yeah. So anyway, that's a cool mic. And I don't know, I used it maybe once or twice. I didn't really go back to it. I mean, I guess I didn't think it was the microphone to end all microphones, but it was good. And I think they sent it to me to try, so I tried it, and it was pretty good. All right, next post. Limiting a bit before compressing. So yeah, this concept of using a limiter in your signal chain before you even use a compressor. And I do this basically only when a podcast participant is extremely dynamic, where they're alternating between very loud and then very soft. And so in these cases, what I'll do is I'll use a limiter first, because when they get really loud, I'll use a limiter to basically, put a ceiling on that loudness, right? To just stop it at a certain point. And so, yes, it'll get loud, but the limiter will make sure it doesn't go off the charts loud, right? And then once I've sort of tamed those extreme peaks, then after that in the signal chain, I'll use a compressor. And the reason I do that is because if you tame those extreme peaks and then send the audio to the compressor, it doesn't get overwhelmed with those extreme peaks. Yes, they're peaks still, but not that extreme. So that's why I do it. And then the compressor can do its job a little better without having to deal with these extreme peaks. So that's a little trick that I do that works really well, actually. And you can even use a limiter after the compressor as well if you want to, or even even on the master bus or in your mastering. But yeah. All right, next post. What the bleep? Okay, this one is about there's a DVD or a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know? I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's amazing. Very mind-opening. Yeah, anyway. All right, so this post is titled Bleeping Curse Words. All right, well, what if you're producing a show and the people on the show are using profanity, but you want to sort of bleep the profanity, right? Well, there's a few ways you can do that. I don't know. Have you ever needed to do that, or have you ever done that? So the first thing you could do is just delete the word entirely, that usually doesn't sound good. It sounds weird. It sounds unnatural. You know what I mean? It just sounds weird. And the listener will be able to tell that you cut something out, and they'll pretty much, from context, be able to tell that it was a curse word, but whatever. Okay, the second way to do it is to replace the curse word, with another piece of audio, usually a 1 kilohertz tone, like boop, or another sound effect like a horn, whack, or a duck, whack, whack. Like instead of the beep, the bleep sound, you can use any sound, which it does call attention to itself, right? Either the 1 kilohertz tone or another sound, but it sounds better than just cutting out the curse word altogether. And plus it does let the listener know that the participant did use a curse word, but obviously they won't be able to hear it. And the third way to handle this is to reverse the curse word. You can literally highlight the curse word, and in most DAWs or really any audio editing software, you can reverse a piece of audio. So you just reverse it. So then, the word that begins with sh, that one, when you reverse it, it'll sound like tish, right? It'll sound weird too. It'll be like tish, weird reverse audio, but that's a cool method. That's usually the one I prefer because I don't know why. Because there's audio still there, but it sounds weird, and sometimes it takes you a listen or two to figure out what happened there. But anyway, those are the 3 ways you can bleep curse words. If you, how do you do it? Have you ever had to do it, and how did you do it? That's my question to you. If you want to comment on this episode. All right, next post. Audio normalization. Okay, now you should really check out the Daily Goody post for this, because there's a lot of information in there, like definitions and stuff that I'm not going to go over. I'm not going to read the whole post now, but basically, in terms of normalization, there are 2 types of normalization. There is peak normalization, and then there is loudness normalization. And peak normalization is very simple. It just takes the highest peak of the audio and puts it at whatever level you want to put it at. Like if you want the peak to be at -1, then you just say, okay, use peak normalization, set to -1, and boom, the peak will be at -1. But that's not very handy for actual audio production. The more handy normalization is loudness normalization, which it basically samples the entire file and gets an average loudness of the entire file. And then it will adjust that average loudness to whatever loudness you want. And by the way, that's what we do in our last step of production, where, before you publish a podcast episode, you probably already know that if it's a mono episode, the loudness should be -19 LUFS. And so that's the loudness normalization level, -19. And for a stereo episode, it should be -16 LUFS. So what you're doing when you set your podcast to those loudness standards, that is loudness normalization. That's what you're doing, technically speaking. So, yeah, so that's the main place that people use loudness normalization is in the mastering phase at the very end, when you're setting the final level of the entire episode. The other place you can use loudness normalization, the other place it's very handy, which I do every single episode I ever produce, is I use it on individual tracks before I bring them into my DAW to start mixing. So when I record audio or someone sends me audio, the first thing I do is I clean it up in iZotope RX. So if I need to do any denoise or deplosive or any of that stuff, I do that in iZotope RX. And then the last step in iZotope RX, I set the loudness of that individual file to, I choose to set it to -23 LUFS. And then I save it at -23 LUFS, and then I bring it into my DAW, and then I start editing and mixing. And the same thing, if there's a host of a show and a guest, I set them both individually to -23 LUFS. so that when I bring them both into my DAW, they both start out at the same level, basically. All right, so those are the two places where I use audio normalization in my production workflow. How about you? Do you use it, and where do you use it? All right, next post, and this is not technical. I don't usually publish non-technical posts, but this one, tips for pitching yourself to be a guest on other podcasts. You know, they say one of the best ways to grow your podcast audience is to, if you're a podcast host, is to be a guest on other podcasts, right? Because if you're a guest on another podcast, the people who are listening to that other podcast, they already know about podcasts. They're already listening to podcasts. They already have a podcast app that they like. And so if you're a guest on their show and they like you, they can immediately go to their podcast app and subscribe to your show. So that's why they say it's really good to be a guest on other shows. And in this post, I mentioned tips for pitching yourself to be a guest on other podcasts. And I'll just go over real quick. You can go to the post and read the entire thing, but I'll sum it up right here. So the first thing, if you can listen to a little bit of their show before approaching them, that's always the best, because you need to know, you can't just pitch yourself blindly to 1,000 other podcasts, right? The best way is to check out their show, listen to an episode or two, or listen to just 10 minutes or something. Listen to something so you actually sort of get a feel for the show, right? And then you can offer yourself as a guest. You can approach the host and offer yourself as a guest. And you know what you can do? List 4 or 5 relevant topics that you could discuss with them on their show. So, and you can only understand what 4 or 5 relevant topics might be if you know what their show is. And then you have to have knowledge in your brain that is applicable to their show, or, you know, that resonates with their show and their listeners, right? So next thing, you can mention that you'd be happy to share and promote the episode with all of your audience afterwards. That always helps, right? Then you can state that you already have a good audio setup, which if you're hosting a podcast, you should have a good audio setup. And not necessarily great audio setup, but good, right? All you need is good. Good is good enough, right? That's what Dave Jackson always says, right? So if you tell the other podcast that you already have a good audio setup, that's good, because then they'll know that, okay, I can interview this person and it's not going to be a nightmare in post-production, right? Having to fix horrendous audio, right? And then also you can, if you have a flexible schedule, you can tell them that, like, hey, I have a flexible schedule, so whenever you want to, I'm open. And so anyway, those are just a few things you can do as you approach other podcasts to be a guest on their show. And it really helps, and they really will like and respect the fact that you took the time and to explain all that to them and play ball with them and help share their show and have good audio setup and all that. All right, next post. This isn't the last one. I love this. I'm actually reading the title of the post now. I love this. Morbid podcast mixes their ads a bit lower in volume. So there's a podcast called Morbid, and it's a true crime podcast. And I used to listen to it, but I don't listen to it anymore, actually, because they started mentioning like social issues and I don't know if they directly mentioned politics and stuff, but they mentioned enough social issues and political topics that I was like, you know what? I wasn't listening to the show for that. I wanted to hear the stories. And so when they started mentioning that stuff, and I mean, just in passing, they would mention things, and I don't know. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And so I haven't listened to them in a long, long time. But anyway, when I did back when I did listen to Morbid, one thing I really liked, and I really don't know if they did this on purpose, and I never found out because I don't know how to get in touch with them, and at this point I don't really care, but you know what they did? They had ads in the middle of their show, right? Mid-roll, or maybe even, some sort of a mid-roll ad they had. And they would actually mix the level of the ads. They would make the ads a little bit lower in volume than the podcast itself, which is the opposite of what TV does and what other podcasts do, right? A lot of times the ads are louder than the show, and that's very annoying, right? So I don't know if they did it on purpose, but the ads were like a little bit lower in volume. You could still hear it perfectly, pretty much, but it was just a little bit lower, so it wasn't so annoying. But you could still hear it. And then when the hosts came back in, it was back at full volume, and it was great, right? So again, I don't know if they did that on purpose, but that was very cool. And I think all ads should be that way. Just a little bit lower in volume, right? Just to not annoy people. All right. Well, the last post we're going to cover is actually a plugin. Is it loading? It's actually a plugin called Plugin Doctor. And I bought this. This is another one I bought that I really never use. This is a plugin analyzer for VST and AU plugins. So it's a plugin. It's called Plugin Doctor. And what it does is it can analyze audio in your DAW, and it can analyze other plugins in terms of harmonic analysis, dynamics, performance, in terms of how certain plugins are performing, and a lot of other things. This is this is a technical plugin. This is like precision analysis of audio, and so this is a plugin that really just regular podcasters don't need. Even podcast producers, you really don't need this plugin. I bought it because it was on sale, and I was planning on maybe checking out some of my plugins, analyzing them, but I never got around to it. So, and a lot of YouTubers will use Plugin Doctor when they'll be like doing a review of a plugin, like some compressor plugin, and they'll be able to see using Plugin Doctor if there's any harmonic resonance and if there's aliasing and all these things. It's very technical, and again, I don't even do that, so sure you don't need to do that, but it is a cool plugin, and it is very handy if you're going to do any of this stuff. So, well, that's Plugin Doctor. All right, well, that's it for this episode. I'm happy you're here hanging out with me. Thank you. And if you ever want to contact me, just go to the website, podcastengineeringschool.com, and there's a contact page. Just send me a note. Send me a love note. All right? Maybe I'll, zap you some Satoshis if you send me a love note. See, now I'm bribing you to send me a love note. This is so pathetic. Oh, all right. Anyway, but I wasn't really kidding. But by the way, did you know I have a small course called Getting New Clients at Higher Rates? Yeah. If you're a podcast editor or producer and you want to get more clients, but you want to charge 3 times what you're charging now or 4 times what you're charging now, then I have a course that'll explain how to do that, because that's what I did for years. Still doing it. So, all right. Well, that's it. Thanks, everybody. Again, apologies that I'm sort of in the middle of pod fading. I don't know when the next episode will be. I do have a few people on deck to be interviewed, but I don't know. Maybe one of you could come co-host an episode with me or something. If you want to co-host an interview with me, let me know. I don't know. I feel like I just need to mix it up. But yeah, and all the links will be in the show notes, so check out the show notes of everything I mentioned, and that's it. I appreciate you, and I I wish you all the best in your podcast audio production. I hope you become a top tier professional. And I don't know why I said top tier, but that's Brian Ensminger's company. Top tier audio. Yeah, baby. PES graduate, Brian Ensminger. By the way, if you're using Hindenburg Journalist Pro and you need help, or you need a course on how to do it better, Brian Ensminger has a course on that too. So, all right, that's it. Enough. Is that enough for today? All right, it's enough. Yeah. Oh yeah. All right, we'll see you. Bye.